Thanks for joining for this episode of the TechSpective Podcast. I have with me Brad LaPorte. So, Brad, can you give a little background on yourself? And I think a lot of people are familiar with you, but some may not be.
Yep. Well, thank you, Tony. Thank you for having me here. So, Brad LaPorte, I am the Chief Marketing Officer at Morphisec, and basically is one of the leading anti-ransomware companies. And we also are one of the leading preemptive cyber defense companies, and previously covered ransomware and a lot of the topics that we'll talk about at a little market intelligence firm called Gartner. Worked there for a few years on a lot of different magic quadrants and a lot of fields, and then spent a large portion of the earlier part of my career serving my country as a Army officer in the United States, and then going off and working with Dell SecureWorks and IBM and building out, some of the first managed detection response and managed endpoint detection response type technologies, and really some of the next generation SIM stuff early on before we got to, the generation that we're on now.
Awesome. So real quick segue on that. I've always hated the term next gen. Like as soon as was it Palo Alto that first came out with like, we're gonna have the next gen firewall?
No, you know what it could have been? It was them or it was FireEye. I'll flip a coin.
Well, but I was like, if that's next gen, what do you call the next thing? The next gen?
The next. That's
now
why
even next year.
Yeah, SIM. Now we have AI SIM because. It's funny because I fell into the same, running off the cliff lemming effect where it's like, the next evolution of SIM, which, we're on like revolution number 4 now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and advanced is another good one. And what's the difference between basic and advanced then?
In a similar vein, actually, let's talk about preemptive cyber defense, because I'm like basically frame for me in your definition the difference between preemptive cyber defense and just prevention. Because I feel like cybersecurity in general went from castle and moat, we're going to guard the perimeter, to detection and response, we're going to assume people got in and we're just going to get them faster, to where we are now, trying to use AI to kind of pull it all together into this into more of a automated cyber resilience thing. But I'm like, but preemptive cyber defense to me sounds like another way of saying, well, I just want to guard the perimeter. I want to keep the threat from getting in the first place.
Yeah, part of it is really, in order to answer that question, it makes sense to go back to the beginning. So it really started around 2014, 2015, and there was kind of like the first era of that, where you had companies like Chromium, Invincia, Bit9, which became Carbon Black Protect, and some of these application control solutions. All of the legacy vendors had this, they would put up, an application firewall type thing that would help prevent that. Gartner came out with the adaptive security architecture, which eventually, led into more advanced frameworks. But really, what it comes down to is you're predicting, preventing, detecting, responding. You have that continuous loop, and when detection, and really when things evolve from traditional AV and the pre-next generation antivirus, which now we're post that now. So as you're going through that traditional to the next generation AV mechanisms, we started adding machine learning, and we started adding heuristics and even behavioral detection mechanisms. And now we're getting into the more advanced AI components, and now we're getting into more of the fabric aspect of you're collecting not only endpoint logs but network logs, looking at them and across correlation and all of those things. And really, the evolution of all that's all been detection response, because after EDR hit the stream, it was like, oh, this isn't set it and forget it. I actually have to do stuff. I need an actual forensic team that allows me to do this. And and having a managed team to do it. And MDR is one of the fastest growing areas in cybersecurity land. And where we've evolved over this time period is it's just not enough. And the whole paradigm is, okay, I put a lock on my front door, I bypass that front door, I get into your system, and then EDR is that security tool that basically can then detect it, and then you start the whole detection response process to eradicate, mitigate lateral movement, persistence in your environment. Where preemptive picks up is you're shifting that paradigm from detection responding that you can't even find the house on the street, let alone the front door. So you're layering in advanced deception techniques, and then even layering in hardening techniques. So you're continuously improving that environment. So if you think of preemptive preemptive cyber defense, really what that breaks down to is you're looking at a lot of different methods, but one of them being advanced cyber deception. And one of our flagship capabilities under that umbrella is moving target defense. So think of it like a fun house of mirrors. So you walk into that person's yard or that person's house. Now there's multiple different houses. You have those different areas where, okay, this just got really complicated. And then if you talk to police officers or anyone that's on the law enforcement side of the house, why did people break into that person's house? Why did they pick that house out of every other house? Well, the door was unlocked, or the window was open, and it was easiest. The harder you make yourself a target, the more you harden that capability, then that ultimately reduces your overall risk exposures and the ability to get in. And all the different technologies in there, you're constantly looking at to deceive, to disrupt, and deny in a unified fashion. So above and beyond that, so you have that extra layer before you even hit the castle wall, before you hit the moat, before you even get to those components. And even when you get in there, it's so difficult that you're not even able to even establish a foothold. And then even if you can't move very far. You can't move laterally. You can't persist in that environment, and it just doesn't. It ends up being a cost sink for any criminal or anyone that's trying to infiltrate that environment. So that's it in a nutshell. A little bit of a longer answer than you're probably looking for, but at least that answers a lot of different questions.
Well, that's good. And the way you described it at the end there is very similar to the conversations I had, going back to the early 2000s when Wi-Fi was first becoming a thing, and then they found out that how easy it was to crack web, and you could download web crack and get in under a minute. And there were some people who were basically like, don't even bother. Your web security is so crackable that it's not even worth it. And I was like, well, by all means, try to get a WPA, to try to evolve your system and get better encryption for your Wi-Fi. But anything is better than nothing. Like if someone's war driving down the street, can they crack your web? Sure. But if your neighbor has no password at all, why are they going to bother cracking your web?
Facts. Yes. Yeah. The more and more you can harden it, and it's like people think it's like on or off, and it's like, it's good enough, and it's like, no, this is kind of the difference between best of breed and quote good enough, and being able to implement that. And that's kind of the problem with that. And a lot of those Gen 1 tools that were out there 10, 11, 12 years ago was that a lot of them could be bypassed, and those technologies became out of date really quickly. We've had this cat and mouse game, and really the evolution of that. And to put it simply, preemptive cyber defense is effectively where endpoint detection response was back in 2014, 2015, where it really started to see that hockey stick. So, and Gartner basically has the bold statement that over the next 3 to 4 years, we're now going to go from a 5% adoption to over a 50% adoption over that time period, because we're implementing agentic AI, we're implementing all this shadow IT and capabilities. Everything's moving towards applications. towards all these different artificial intelligence capabilities, and there's really not a lot of guardrails, and we're opening up this whole other attack surface. It's kind of like how we shifted from on-prem to cloud infrastructure, where like now we went from like one castle wall to like hundreds of thousands of different smaller little castle walls and little villages. And then, now those little villages have little towns within them and little microcosms that we now have to protect, and have like the whole thing that we have, no real easy way to control it. And we have to combat that with, hands-off technology that really does a lot of the heavy lifting for us, and just really hardens those applications, hardens those systems and those infrastructures. So it's not an easy target.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if you know or not, but like in a former life, I was working with Cyber Reason, so we were very focused on ransomware. I mean, we were an XDR, but we were focused on ransomware a lot. And as I've covered ransomware, over the years, and it's obviously hasn't gotten a lot better. It's if anything, I feel like it's the same or worse. We just don't talk about it as much. It's kind of like school shootings.
Unfortunately, yes, I think that's accurate. So I can validate that it's gotten worse. I actually even have a story that goes with that. But it's just like anything else. There's ebbs and flows. But when I was working back at Gartner back in 2019, I started to identify these weak signals out there, and a lot of the companies I was talking to, Cyber Reason and CrowdStrike, Core et cetera, and going around interviewing companies that either had just had a ransomware attack or just had a data breach, not necessarily a ransomware attack, and just had some kind of event either pre, during, or post. And sometimes law enforcement was involved and not. And actually did a tour around the state of Florida and met with a considerable amount of organizations to conduct that primary research. And as part of that, at the time, ransomware was dead. This is 2019. We already went past WannaCry. Everyone had EDR. Everyone had MDR. They were good. Ransomware is bye-bye. That was so last year. And then all of a sudden, like we're seeing like, oh, this is bad. Like this is really becoming an epidemic, like overnight. And what was happening was it was happening and people weren't reporting it. And we went from everyone reporting it down to basically, okay, 2/3 are reporting it to 1/3 to now less than 1%. And that's now why we have the SEC regulation that requires the 72-hour notification. A lot of the regulations that come up is law enforcement basically came out and said, hey, you guys ain't reporting. Hey, public companies, you got to do this now. Like it's for the best of everybody that you do this. And then really, I watched this happen in real time, and come December of 2019, it just blew up. And it really just, what was happening is we had evolved into crime as a service, and specifically for ransomware as a service, where threat groups were starting to work with each other. They were starting to really have marketplaces and use the dark web and all of that for tool sets. There was also the NSA tool breach that took place, and a lot of those tools ended up getting onto the dark web and access to everyone. Started to see polymorphic techniques where you're using different tool sets and modifying it slightly and using polymorphic ransomware. It was one of the first times we started to see like Rust as code out there for ransomware using Rust. And that coding language and a lot of those things. And that really just started to take off. And then we had COVID. Everyone moved from, being in the office to working from home. Oh, talk about, open season. And it's just taken off. And then we went into a little bit of a lull in 2024, but it's really just taken off with the, as we've shifted towards AI, agentic AI especially, we're now seeing it go higher than ever. Seeing increase in average ransomware payments, increase in the median ransomware payment. It's just unfortunately getting worse because the traditional tools, the next gen tools that we've bought, 10 years ago and have implemented, and what, it's kind of that saying, and one of my favorite books, what got you here won't get you there. So what's gotten us here and protected us for the past 10 years was great, but it's not enough anymore. And the proof is in the pudding, because you read the front page of the newspaper, and all you have to do is go to like ransomware.live, or literally the front page of the newspaper, and like every day, several times a day, it's like every couple hours is a very significant ransomware attack that's taking place.
Well, yeah, one of the things that was interesting to me, like, so when I joined Cybereason, which was beginning of 2021.
Okay.
Ransomware was a thing. It was a thing that was
very
happening.
Much. Very much.
That was also around the time, though, that they started. The threat actors were like, "Oh, okay, everyone's caught on. They're doing better with their backups, and they're just restoring their own data. So we're gonna move on to double extortion. We're gonna exfiltrate your data, and we're gonna hold that for ransom." And then it became like a triple extortion thing. And the thing that I thought, and this goes to what you were talking about in terms of like who, when companies aren't reporting that they've been victimized. Like 2-3 years ago, there was the first attack. The first time I saw an attack where they skipped the encryption part, and they just did the data exfiltration. And so it's actually not even really ransomware at that point, because it's like, well, now I'm just extorting you. It's just a data breach, and I'm extorting you. But I thought, hey, that's brilliant, like for the threat actors, because if I encrypt your network, someone's going to notice.
Right.
Whether it's just your own employees, whether it's customers, partners, somebody, like there are, there's a broader blast radius of people who are going to know, oh, we got hit by something. So it's hard to keep it a secret. But if I just steal your data and then extort you with that, well, now we can keep it between friends. Like, SEC doesn't need to be involved. No one else needs to know about it. You can pay me some money. We'll call it good. And so I thought that was brilliant, because I think a lot of companies are in that scenario more willing to pay the ransom if they feel like they can pay the ransom under the radar. If they can pay the ransom and be like, all right, well, I just want to make this go away, and I don't want anyone to know that it happened. And then you quickly saw the threat actors using the SEC rule against companies and being like, hey, listen, we sent you that notice saying we've got your data, and and you need to pay us this ransom. You haven't responded, but you also haven't reported. So now I'm going to use that as part of my extortion. Like, if you don't pay the ransom, I'm going to let the SEC know you didn't report.
Right. And then, even though, yes, absolutely. And this is getting even more complicated. And then after you've done all of that, they hit you with a DDoS attack and take your network down for giggles. And there's certain organizations where it's, you got some serious challenges. Like, you're stealing intellectual property. It could be like the secret sauce, the recipe to the secret sauce. It could be defense, elements for, now you're talking nation states. But it, really could be like a local court system, and you have access to criminal data. Then you start getting into, okay, now I have something I can blackmail people on, or regardless of what it is. And sometimes it's just, interesting data that I can piece with other interesting data, and starting to like get, credential information, and then that spawns other attacks. Typically people that have a ransomware attack, it's not just one. It's multiple, concurrent or even in succession, just attacks in general. It might not just involve ransom or encryption or that type of methodology. And it's kind of like a sliding scale. It's not an on-off switch. It's a dimmer switch. There's a lot of dials and knobs on the complexity of all of this. And they're going to get their money one way or another. And this has evolved even into going after executives now. Just going after very important personnel and people and trying to target them and trying to get them exposed multiple different elements because they're looking for the weakest part. And with deepfakes and everything else, we're now seeing a lot of that shift as well. So they're like, there's no rules.
Well, I was going to say that it's funny to me that the parallels. Like you talked about how around 2020, ransomware, shifted from being a version of malware, like you got your viruses, you got your worms, you got your ransomware, a version of malware that just happens to encrypt your data, to, oh no, this is a full-fledged enterprise with a supply chain and supporting companies, and you've got entities who are like, we just do accounts payable for ransomware, or we just do, initial breach, and then we sell access, and like it became a full-fledged business of its own. And then, but in a similar parallel, I feel like all the ways we just talked about how like it was ransomware, but then it was double extortion, and then it was just kind of extortion without the ransomware, and how it's all kind of blurred. Like we could still call it ransomware. It's still like an evolution of ransomware, but the ransomware part of it is kind of not even part of the equation a lot of the time now.
Right.
And like, when you talk about, using the data for other things, it's like, I think back to when, we had Signalgate, with the Secretary of Defense and such. And then right after that, I forget the dude's name, but there was the thing where like the reporter started digging in and found out like you could go into and find his whole like Venmo history of like everyone he's like ever like paid money to. And I remember people saying, well, that's silly. Who cares? Like, why do I care that he ordered a pizza with Brad? And I'm like, okay, here's why. Because if I'm trying to make a phishing attack, if I'm making a smishing attack, a deep fake, if I'm making something to send to this person, and I know that tidbit of information is enough to like get me in the door. Like if I say, hey, remember that pizza we had together? Then you're like, oh yeah, I remember we had a pizza together. So it's like those little tidbits of information do matter. Like they seem innocuous, they seem meaningless, but they add value, they add credibility to your phishing attack, which then brings me back to not just for ransomware, but for like attacks in general. And it's trite, and we've said it forever, and actually I'm gonna say it, and then I'm gonna backtrack it. But we've always said like the user is the weakest link, and the part I'm gonna backtrack is I feel like a lot of cybersecurity vendors and practitioners use that as kind of a shrug your shoulders, like, "Wait, what are you going to do? The user's always going to mess it up." It's like, well, no, it's not an excuse. It's just something for you to recognize as part of the attack surface that you can have the greatest tools in the world, but if someone is able to get the Venmo history of one of your, VPs and craft a credible phishing message that they can send and are able to get their credentials and get in, and it's like ultimately it's like it human nature is kind of the weakest link of the security chain, because it's like, so even for me, I have been doing this long enough, I can recognize things, and and it's like I don't want to be cocky about it, like but generally speaking, I can recognize, and also I'm pretty cynical even when it's a legit message. Like I'm more likely to delete it than open it out of caution. That said, there have still been times where, especially like if we're coming up on the holidays, you start to get like UPS and FedEx notifications saying that your package is delayed or whatever. It's like it's real easy to be busy and be like and have like cognitive overload, and then you're expecting a package from FedEx, and it's got that present that you ordered for your wife, and you want to make sure it's here on time, and you see a message that says, hey, your FedEx package is delayed, and you click it because you don't stop to think, and you go, oh shit, I shouldn't click that.
Yeah. No, and it's and I've actually had scenarios where they got credentials. They were able to compromise the email system. They were able to see, all the traffic going back and forth, and they basically, discovered the accounts payable. And then they started to see, okay, this is what the purchase orders look like. This is when they normally do wire transfers and things like that. They could easily, basically, they were able to compromise the email server, and were able to basically spoof the network, craft up a PO, purchase order, and then send it, and then with the wrong wire instructions. And so they're able to get 6, 7, sometimes 8 figures. I've seen that in a couple different cases.
And the thing is, that's not going to, most of the time that's probably not going to work. But because they were able to see and understand, okay, this is the normal process. This is what a normal PO looks like. This is when they process them. If you have enough of those pieces that you can put together, it drastically increases your odds of success, because it's much more likely that they'll just process it as like I remember it wasn't even, I don't even remember how it happened. I don't even know if it was malware or just pure fraud, but I remember like 6, 7 years ago, there was some story of someone who had gotten like Microsoft or Facebook or somebody to process like just tens, hundreds of thousands of dollars of invoices for stuff that never happened. And I remember being upset about that, because I'm like, I can't get legitimate customers to pay me on time. Like, you're getting Microsoft to pay you for something you didn't do.
Yeah, amazing, without a doubt. And also, and like, one thing might not be interesting, but if you look at it in aggregate, so have you ever heard of the Pentagon Pizza Index?
Yes.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So, like, for those that don't know, like, basically anytime there's U.S. government military tension indicator, something's going on of interest. Well, what do? They stay in the office and they order pizza. And so, like, if you look at there's actually a website that you can go to, and they actually track, the ebbs and flows and the spikes and all of that. So all of a sudden you see these pizza places are having, 300, 400, or 500% spike all at the same time, on this particular day. And like, there's some other, like, you correlate that with other information, all this
like
other.
If you were looking today and you saw a spike, you'd be like, oh, I guess we're invading Venezuela.
Yeah. And once you start mapping in that open source intelligence aspects and the threat intel aspects to it, and it's like, oh, okay, well, I don't know, I don't have an invite to the wedding, but I see people in nice attire. I hear the music. I see the flowers. Maybe that's enough that I need to do that. And I see all of this from a cybersecurity perspective in the same fashion. And a large portion of that is close to ransomware as well. You start seeing the breadcrumbs and all of that, and you can't just rely on one aspect of it. So we, at Morphisec, we basically our main aspect is to stop it, but not just block it at the edge, or just having up a really big wall. We're looking at it across multiple facets, multiple layers across the entire MITRE attack framework, kill chain, whatever your favorite model is, to just keep it simple. So, it's pre-execution, execution, post-execution, and holistically. So, whether it's reconnaissance, we're looking at, monitoring security baseline gaps. We're looking at the vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. We're looking at unsanctioned applications that shouldn't be there and running, and doing naughty things. We're looking at the different service and privilege accounts and hygiene and all of that, and the whole identity side of the house. We're looking at outdated or end of life applications that shouldn't be there, or systems that shouldn't be there. And then, in the event that gets circumvented, as the lateral movement and preemptive access piece. So stopping that privilege escalation, stopping the exploitation, and being able to detect any kind of lateral movement techniques and tools that might be being used, preventing the tampering, stopping user access control and AMSI bypass and other bypass elements, and basically stopping that account takeover stage. And then in the event they do get to that exfiltration, so sometimes they go through that, like you said, you get a key to the front door because you've stolen credentials, you'll be able to circumvent and navigate through that. The best tool in the world, or best endpoint or EDR in the world is not going to be able to stop that, especially if they're able to bypass those tools, and basically, turn off the security camera and bypass those amazing next generation tools. Then you get to the exfiltration point, being able to stop that, protect the data exfiltration, stop that double extortion aspects of it. So you're not even allowing them to do that. Stopping the LSAT dump attempt, stopping exfiltration tool, blocking those known tools, and then the deployment. Right on that side, you have preventing the endpoint encryption piece if encryption's to play, any kind of shadow copy deletion, any backup deletion, being able to prevent data destruction. And then, you get into that extortion side of the house where in the post-execution, we've gotten past all that. You're able to recover encryption keys. You're able to restore and recover something we call adaptive recovery, being able to restore from hidden recovery points, and being able to do forensics on what the heck happened. And then, effectively doing that post ransomware assessment service and being able to do this across the whole chain in unison. And so whether you have one ransomware attack or, maybe it's not a ransomware attack, it's a 0-day, it's an advanced level attack. And we look at it holistically and we call it, full spectrum anti-ransomware and being able to stop against this stuff. So you're hitting at all those different points and stopping all the different ways that you could potentially get into an environment while doing that deception piece. We have that fun house of mirrors and it really works incredibly well and being able to mitigate that. So it really stops that blast radius from occurring as much as humanly possible. And that's really like the ideal way to go about this.
Okay. I have two questions that kind of get like more like kind of your thoughts in general on the world. But one is, so you talked about when you're introducing your background. I mean, you had a career in military intelligence. You went from that. You were an analyst for Gartner. So go from like practitioner to analyst and now to CMO. I will say I've also have worn all these different hats from going in the trenches to being on the writing side of things to whatever. But I just wanted to see like how does that background influence your perspective on the threat landscape today and how to market effectively for it?
Yeah. Well, I'll say it starts the perfect mix is having an equal amount of ADHD and OCD, evenly matched as much. So I'm constantly in the flow state, and I can take all these aspects of this and kind of really build it up over time. So I've actually, what I've tried, really what it breaks down to is I have an insatiable thirst for knowledge, and I'm constantly learning. Anyone that knows me, I'm the best that I've ever been on this day because I try to be better. I only compete with myself, and I try to be better than the guy that you met yesterday. So taking all of that, my undergrad, like my background is actually in business. I have my MBA, my undergrad's in business. I've learned all the financial aspects and how the money flows. In the military officer, I did cybersecurity for the military intelligence, so I got exposed to not only the cyber side but also the intel side. So it's really had a really vast exposure to that, not only how other countries do it, so working like overseas and with Five Eyes and a lot of the different alliances that the United States has, and with that, that's how I got exposed to the IDF and a lot of the other alliance partners that we have, and then transitioning that, I went to the vendor side, SecureWorks, IBM, and I learned, okay, how do I support end customers, some of the top global 500, knowing them all intimately over the past, that time period, and really understanding like, okay, what do I need to do from not only a product side, but from a service side? So I I had an extensive product management experience, worked closely with marketing, and my background was also, business, and that large portion that's marketing. And then effectively learning all that piece from that side, and then bringing it forward, on the Gartner side, I was able to say, I've done this. Like, I've been a practitioner. I have all the training and certifications. I built out services for a lot of these products, worked with built a lot of these tools, as a product manager and leading all of that, and all of those aspects, and then taking those lessons learned and providing it at the Gartner level. And when you look at Gartner analysts, there's kind of two types. One are like the academic, really smart folks that, been with Gartner 20, 30 years, talked to, millions of people over that time period, and they just know a lot. They've read a lot. They know a lot. They haven't had hands on keyboard and actually been in the trenches. And you have the operational people like me, where, basically I've been in the trenches. I've worked through a lot of that and can mix the different triad of the business, the technical, and kind of the whole go-to-market sales aspects as well, as in making all that stuff sing. And after that, after leaving, I was a consultant for many years, and after Gartner, to the past 5 years, being a consultant and effectively, working with a lot of investors and a lot of different vendors, worked with over 50 vendors during that time period, some of which were the Global 50 and Global 500, and some of the top 10 in the cybersecurity land, and really learned a lot about how the money, how funding works, and then what it takes to get to the different stages, and what makes a good product, what makes companies really fail, succeed versus fail, and especially in certain geographies, and what the global expansion looks like, and a lot of the macroeconomics, while all this time working with all the buyers. So being a buyer and on both ends of the spectrum, and then product side, building it, and then now where I'm working with Morphisec, I kind of get to bring all of that home and all that in unison, along with my ADHD and my OCD.
Okay.
So.
No, I mean, it's good. I mean, like I said, I've also worn many hats, and personally, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I mean, I feel like it's advantageous, because as someone who does tech journalism and content development, the fact that I was once upon a time in the IT and cybersecurity trenches means that I have some level of understanding that someone who's purely a writer, who maybe they went to college and got their degree in English and that's what they do,
right.
They don't know how to connect the dots in the same way. They might be great at writing in and of itself, but not be able to really convey it properly. And I think when I made that transition from security, from being in the security trenches to being a security writer, part of what I built that success on was my ability to draw the analogy, was my ability to say, okay, I understand what we're trying to say. Let me translate this into English for people who don't speak tech.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. And a good example of that, earlier in the session, I talked about threat actors using Rust as a coding mechanism, and a novice person would be like, well, what's so interesting about that? And it's well, because not a lot of detection mechanisms look for Rust, and then it's also harder because it's a more secure language to reverse engineer it, and it's easier so it's a harder learning curve than some of the other traditional languages that typical threat actors will use. And basically, once they learn Rust, they can really lock it down. So it's incredibly hard to do that reverse engineering. And it's easier to implement. It's more devastating and impactful, and it's harder to do forensics on. And so if you can, and it also opens a much larger door to polymorphic malware and ransomware and those types of attacks, because you can basically, when I say polymorphic, basically being able to modify a traditional set. So think of a traditional virus mutating, but basically modifying that code slightly, that it's able to circumvent traditional detection mechanisms because it looks different. So typical novice would be like, okay, what about Rust? And that's the core difference.
Well, I'm going to jump back a bit to one of the things we're talking about when we were talking about like the sort of innocuous bits of data that might be out there about you, and maybe not just innocuous, just data. And I will say that over the years that I've talked to companies about preventing data breaches and especially at a personal consumer level, like being able to protect my information. I've been increasingly cynical about it because I'm like, okay, but the things that really matter are already out there. The genie's out of the bottle. I can't get them back. Like there have been enough breaches. Right. My social security number and my driver's license number and my date of birth and like all of those things that are like immutable about me already exist on the dark web, and there's nothing I can do about that. Now I can maybe change the way I function in the world knowing that, but there's nothing I can do to get it back.
Right.
And I feel that way, and I have that same level of cynicism. Maybe not the same level, but I have a similar level of cynicism about data in general, even company data, where I'm like, okay, if it's new stuff, if it's stuff that you just came up with, if it's your financial projections for next year, then absolutely we should protect that. If we're talking about stuff that existed on your server 2 years ago, that's already been breached. Don't even worry about that.
Yeah. Well, it's scary, especially with all this deepfake and AI. I mean, it's almost impossible, especially with some of the stuff that have come out. And, we're doing this session here. I mean, someone could take either of our likeness now and replicate it and post it and say something like that.
I've talked about it on past episodes that my kids have pointed out that like when it comes to deepfakes, they said we need to have a family code word for me, not necessarily for everyone else, but like it would be helpful for anyone, but they're like, no, for you in particular, because they're like, you've got the podcast, your voice is out there, your likeness is out there, your photo is everywhere. It would be real easy for someone to deepfake you in particular. And I was like, yeah, it's fair, Yeah.
And I've seen some of this, and this is one of the top attack vectors for wire fraud, but even social engineering in general and phishing in general is using this. And it's like, I thought it was you, and you said you mentioned pizza. I know you love pizza, and like anyone that knows me knows that I love pizza, and it's like, yeah, that's got to be Brad.
Well, and that almost. For someone who doesn't know, that maybe sounds a little too obvious or whatever. Like, well, everyone likes pizza. That's easy one.
Yeah. Fair enough.
But no, that's just the example I pulled from the Venmo thing. But like if I have access to your Venmo transactions, history or other data like that, it's not about pizza necessarily, but it's like, you went on a vacation to, Chicago with friends or whatever. Like, if I know that and I can weave that in to a conversation or, to a message, it's going to be that much more credible for you. You're much more likely to open it because you're like, well, yes, I did go to Chicago with Tony. That's true.
Yeah. I mean, you post something on LinkedIn or, you have a social media account like Facebook or Instagram or something like that. That's dangerous. And they use that. They can use that information to socially engineer and fish and get that initial foothold.
There's a company. I'm not going to name them here, in the podcast, but I did a briefing with them a few months back, and their whole focus is basically trying to contain and clean that sort of information for high-profile individuals. So this is not a cheap service. It's not a service that your average person would use, but it was a very eye-opening experience because for the call, they went and did all the things that they would do for an executive or whatever for me to show like, hey, here's all the stuff we know about you. I can name all your kids. I can name your wife. I can name your ex-wife. I know who your dad is. I know who your mom is. I know where you went to high school. I know like all these things like and it is impressive and scary simultaneously how how quickly you can build this graph of an individual off of just drilling down on social media and online data, and I can get a pretty in-depth profile of Brad LaPorte and your entire history and everything about you. And this company that I was talking to, I mean, they went farther in terms of like your day-to-day now, like, what's your routine, like when you go to the gym or when you eat out, are there favorite restaurants you have, like where's your doctor's office, like all of those things that, like, someone, again, who's a high profile individual, like a celebrity or an executive who basically someone who might consider hiring a security detail might want that information not public. Might want that information cleaned up as much as possible. But there was part of it where I was like, okay, but some of that stuff is not, you can't clean it. Like, I bought this house. Like that's a matter of public record. I can't unrecord that. But they did. I mean, there are actually ways that high profile individuals do that. I mean, you could like buy a house through a holding company kind of thing, so that it's like it doesn't have your name on it.
Yeah, it's the level of effort that you have to go through to do that. I mean, it's very difficult. So yeah, it's only for like really effectively the top, not even 1%, top 0.1%. Because I've looked into that, and it's just crazy amount of paperwork. I mean, the return on investment of my time and money and effort to do all of that is.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it sort of sounded cool, but by the end of it, I was like, you want how much per month? I'm like, no, my identity is not worth that. I'm good.
Yeah, I'll just block it. Thanks, though. But yeah, it's interesting to see this evolve. I mean, we're now starting to see a lot of AI being used to do a lot of nasty stuff. Coming up with interesting 0 days and vulnerabilities, and really these different tools and systems. Now prop lock has come out, in one of the first ransomware techniques that leverages AI. We're going to see more and more of that, in the days, weeks, and months, and all of 2026 as this evolves. So,
and it puts a new face on polymorphic when you have, and I've seen a couple examples in the last week or two of attacks that are, AI driven attacks where the AI is changing the attack on the fly based on the situation on the ground. And it's like, yeah, that's a whole different kind of polymorphic.
Yeah, I know. And that's becoming the new norm. And that's effectively why we've had the success that we've had at Morphisec, because we're literally, I mean, Gartner actually came out with a research note that, basically preemptive cyber defense is the only thing to avert weaponized AI risks, because of that exact reason. And then the other thing, the elephant in the room, is a lot of the traditional, formerly known as next generation solutions out there are based on different modelings. Okay, so we had signatures, we went to heuristics and rules and behavioral based UEBA and all that, and then evolved into machine learning, and now we have artificial intelligence modeling and all of these different solutions. Well, what about AI poisoning? And the cat and mouse game is the same thing. We just have bigger and prettier cats and mice. So it's you have to have something to provide that safety net and that fortification, that thing that's going to have like anti-polymorphism approach. And that effectively what it is preemptive cyber defense, is being able to combat that in real time, where it's the attacker is changing up their tools as in real time, but you're changing the landscape in real time. So the tools don't matter if you can't find the house in the first place. Those are the different techniques and things that are evolving that really just future proofs your infrastructure and your organization for these threats that are evolving. And who knows what this is going to look like in a year? I don't know. I got a crystal ball. I now don't even know what it's going to look like. So maybe we could buy, invest in a company together and make millions of dollars, and we can buy that service to protect our identities.
Well, perhaps. Also, I was going to say, like, there's a lot of parallels to, like my life and career and your life and career, except for that, like, just, different turns. And when I look back, I'm like, yeah, I think I missed a lot of potential opportunities, because I was like, I was all in early on computers. I was like one of the first people who was all in on doing stuff on the internet. And like, I was always the guy everyone went to like, get their questions answered. And, so it's like, I was in the right circles and in the right rooms to be part of the early wave of, I could have been part of the .com boom. I could have been part of the, the whatever boom.
Yeah.
And I feel like I should have cashed out a couple of startups by now. And instead, here I am.
Well, I think you're doing a great job.
Appreciate it.
So, you're not rich and famous, but at least you're famous. So you just gotta get the other half of that coin. So you just gotta monetize it a little bit better. So you could hold these podcasts and hold people to ransom.
It's true.
There we go.
I've got your likeness now. I can.
Yeah, you got my likeness. So yeah, thanks for coming on my podcast. Now give me $1 million.
All right.
It's a good way to get the word out.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you taking the time to chat. I think it was a good conversation. And it'd be interesting to have you come back and join me in another 6 months. I used to tell people have you come back in a year or two, but I feel like things change so fast now that that's too long.
Yes. I wonder if my beard will be longer and more full. I'll probably have more gray hair. I would love to come back. This was an amazing session, one of my favorite podcasts. Both, long-time listener, first-time caller right here. So thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. I'll be following you along the way. But yeah, let's put a pin in it and do it again in 6 months.
All right. Sounds good. Take care.
All right. Thank you.